Check this out, by the way, middle of September in Scotland. I know, right? It's like 17 degrees Celsius, obviously. And here we are, enjoying a sunny afternoon. I'm going to take a look at two fantastic books, two historical fiction novels by Janet Fitch, The Revolution of Marina M, and the sequel, A Chimes of a Lost Cathedral. I just finished Chimes again yesterday for the second time. Boy oh boy, fantastic book. I've read Revolution 3 times because when I read it the first time the sequel hadn't come out yet, and as soon as the sequel did come out I read it again. So I'll cut to the chase. I've given them both 5 stars, so that's the lead in. Gives you an idea of how much I love these books, although I mean obviously I do because I've read them multiple times. So who's Marina M? You'll understand what the revolution is about. Probably the most famous revolution ever in the 20th century, the October Revolution in Russia, which followed the February Revolution. So there were two, and this is a historical set of novels, or a historical story set during that time in Russia. Marina M is Marina Makarova, who's a young poet. We start in 1916 when Marina herself is 16, and we start off in her family home where she and her two pals, Varvara and Mina, are casting wax into water to see what shapes the wax will form, and then they can read their futures, read their destiny. Just before New Year, on the turn of the year into 1917. And she lives in a liberal household. She's well to do. Her family are liberal, intelligentsia, bourgeois. Her father's a lawyer. Her mother's a housemaid, not a housemaid, a homemaker. She's not even a homemaker, she's just a mother. Because they have housemaids and all of that, so stuff gets done for them. They're well to do, as I said. And Marina spends her time writing poetry. She's very well educated. She speaks English, she speaks French, she speaks German. And after they cast their wax, the story begins with the historical background of what was going on at the time. So the fall of Tsar Nicholas II, into the February Revolution, the July days, unrest, and it all takes place in Petersburg, or St. Petersburg, or Petrograd as it becomes known. And the way that this is written, it feels like you're there. It puts you right there in the thick of it when all this stuff's going down. And it has a real cultural angle to it because, as I said, Marina's a poet, and so she reads a lot of the Silver Age poets. Akhmatova, Bloch, Mandelstam, Gumilyov. And quite near the beginning she finds herself sneaking into the Stray Dog Cafe with her pals and her brother Seryoja, and she gets to see Akhmatova. So it's a real moment for her, and she ends up with a signed, autographed picture of Akhmatova. Or is it just a piece of paper? I think it's just a piece of paper that she writes a message on for her, and that becomes her most treasured possession. Now at the beginning of the book we have a prologue, which is a bit of a spoiler in a way because it tells us that Marina survives. So that's a given, that's not a spoiler for this video. We know at the very beginning of the book that she survives, and we also know that she gets out of Russia, because in the prologue she's on the beach on the east coast of the USA. Or is it the west coast? I think it's the west coast. And so we know that she's got there, she's escaped Russia. So yeah, there we go. And it starts off with a discussion of the difference between flotsam and jetsam, which is quite a nice little touch because it comes up through the story. There's a bit where she describes herself as being flotsam, floating around Russia, revolutionary Russia.
Times like this I surprise myself, how I've managed to create something of a life on this foggy shore, out of the broken pieces of myself, scavenged from the sea like flotsam. Or is it jetsam? It irks me not to know the difference. I will have to consult my oracle, the giant mouldy Webster's I've acquired since my arrival here, the very edition we had in my childhood home, that lived on a stout shelf along with the Nouveau Larousse Illustré, the Deutsches Wörterbuch, and Dahl's Explanatory Dictionary of the Living Great Russian Language. When I was very small, I had to sit on my knees to read these great books. Why do you not write in English, Marina? Because when you are flotsam, or jetsam, you cling to what is yours. After the landlord's lanky son leaves, that delightful image, I lay my Webster's on the scrubbed table in the lantern light, to learn that flotsam is the debris left from shipwreck, while jetsam is merchandise thrown overboard from a ship in crisis to lighten the load. Ship in crisis. That it was. The difference seems to be tied to the fate of the ship. Did it survive after shedding those such as myself, tossing us overboard, jetsam, to lighten the load? Or did it founder, to be torn apart, mastless and rudderless, the planks and boards washed ashore, flotsam, perhaps one bearing the ship's name? And the name was Revolution.
So that's really the premise of the story, and we follow Marina as she breaks up from her family because her family don't believe in the revolution. Her father in particular is a member of the Cadets political party, which is the Constitutional Democrats, and he forms part of the provisional government, which comes into power between February and October, headed by Kerensky. And Marina's not, she doesn't have the same politics, she believes in the revolution, so she ends up being kicked out, basically, and having to make it on her own. So then we follow that. It's a coming of age story of this young 16 into 17-year-old Marina as she learns to navigate the revolution and politics. And her friend Varvara, she becomes quite active in the revolutionary movement. So that forms a really important part of the story. So I won't spoil it any more than that, but Varvara becomes a Chekist, basically, a member of the Cheka, which is Cheka, two initials, Чрезвычайная комиссия, which means emergency commission. So that's the secret police that was set up by Lenin after the revolution took place in October 1917. And it's the Cheka. So Varvara's involved with that, and you know, yeah, we'll just leave it there. And so we follow the story all through the revolution, all the stuff that's going on in Petrograd, into the famine, into the Civil War. The Civil War takes place in the sequel, Chimes of a Lost Cathedral. And we also follow the relationships that she has, including one with an old school boyfriend called Kolya, Nikolai Shurov. And he becomes a speculator. So we get the background of that with what it was like during the revolution, with those who were still able to afford certain luxuries. They needed people to provide them. So that's where the NEP men came in, which is a new economic policy. That's what Nikolai becomes. And so we follow that relationship, and she also falls in with a poet called Gennady Kuryakin. And she ends up with him living in the House of Arts, living in the Poverty Artiel, which is a group of young poets basically, who idolise Bloch and Mandelstam and Akhmatova. And Gorky, Maxim Gorky, he plays a big role in the book. He has a part to play, as does Bloch, Alexander Bloch. So we've got a real cultural thread running through this whole story because of Marina as being a poet herself. So that adds a whole new a whole different angle into the history of the revolution. So it follows the culture and the history at the same time, which makes it absolutely fascinating. It's led me to actually buying some Akhmatova poetry again. And you might have noticed I've been reading it out on my channel. It's just made me fall in love with poetry. It's made me hunger for it, which surprises me as much as anyone. You know, I did study Akhmatova back when I was a student at St Andrews, 94 to 5, my second year. Don't think my essay that I wrote was particularly mind-blowing, and I didn't get the poetry at the time because I wasn't ready for it. I'm ready now though. So if you're interested in that, you can follow my channel because I'm going to be reading out poems in Russian and then in translation. I'm trying to put one out a week. And this has all come about just from having read this and from having read Orlando Fige's book, Natasha's Dance, which is a cultural history of Russia from 1703 through to the 1960s. And Akhmatova features in that as well. So between Fige's and Janet Fitch's historical novels, you know, I'm getting back into poetry again. I'll say back into it. Getting into it, I was never into it to begin with. I wanted to be, but just didn't get it. So that's a great thing that's come as a result of reading these books. And also, I'll just point out that the audiobooks of these are expertly narrated by Yelena Shmulinson, who's a native Russian speaker. And she adds a lot to the feeling of the place and time and the events by the way that she pronounces all of the names properly and all of the places. And there are some Russian words in the book as well, which add to the feel, and they don't detract, they don't draw you out, or at least they didn't me, but perhaps that's because I know Russian. I don't think that the use of the Russian language as it's used in these books would draw you out of it and cause you any trouble. The context makes it quite clear what the vocabulary means that's being used, so yeah. The relationship with Shura and Marina is very enjoyable to read. Nikolai Shurov, and there's also some criminal underworld that Marina finds herself getting involved in through Nikolai Shurov. Yeah, I won't give much more away than that, but the criminal underworld is a big part of the book. And Marina's story, her adventures through this period of time. So that adds another fun angle to it. And the use of the kids, the orphans, that's really well done. And the way that the famine is described really brings it home. As I said, it puts you there in this period, which is really what I loved the most about it. It felt like I was living through that period in that place. Wow, it's unimaginable, except Janet Fitch clearly did imagine it. and researched it impeccably well, with the dates and times and events that happened, all the real historical events that are interwoven, all the characters, the politicians, the poets, the writers. Fantastic. So that's my review, 2 5-star books. If you love Russian history, particularly 20th century history, these books are for you. Just as they are for me. It feels like they were written just for me, but I'm sure there are other people out there for whom it would feel the same. So pick them up and enjoy. Thanks for watching. Bye.